Drake got caught up in a fake pregnancy scare, and this Aussie mom lost 60,000 Australian dollars just because she opened up a phishing text. Let's find out what the most common scams are. Number 4. Fake pregnancy. There are loads of conniving people in the world, and it's no surprise that wealthy folks have big targets on their backs. Take Layla Lace. Layla claimed that Drake got her pregnant after a 2017 show in Manchester, England. She claimed that she was 100% sure who she had been with and that Drake's definitely the father. After making these false claims, she threatened Drake and told him she would share her stories with the public. In April 2017, Layla did just that. She posted her claims on Instagram and went on SiriusXM's Shade 45 proclaiming that Drake impregnated her. With no shortage of available ways to steal money, con artists find their prey's weaknesses and calculate strategic methods to trick even the smartest, wealthiest, most powerful members of society. Recently, there's been an uptick in the number of women purposefully becoming pregnant in order to receive child support payments. Become pregnant by a rich guy, and those payments will keep these predatory ladies paid for the next 18 years. This scheme is not new. However, there's a twist on this type of trickery. Women are now faking pregnancy in order to score payouts and cash galore. The rich, and especially the famous, have the money and the reputations that draw swindlers, cheats, and phonies to them like magnets. When her original tactics didn't work, Layla employed a lawyer to write a letter demanding a payout for Layla's child with the looming threat of a defamation lawsuit. When Drake wouldn't pay, Layla claimed Drake, let's just say, wasn't very nice to her. You guys can catch our drift here, and thank YouTube censors. Drake claims that Layla's legal team demanded millions of dollars or they would tell the world their allegations. Luckily for Drake, he had text messages that imply he and Layla's rendezvous was consensual. In fact, Layla frequently texted Drake after their one-night stand, asking to spend more time together. Further, Layla could not prove that she had Drake's child. Drake responded by filing a lawsuit against Layla London, alleging fraud, defamation, extortion, and more. He claims that Layla London was upset because he refused to spend time with her after their initial meeting. She even booked a flight to see him without Drake's agreement. London opted not to go to trial against the famous rapper and settled out of court. In the settlement, she agreed not to make any more disparaging or false comments about Drake, their relationship, or having the hip-hop artist's baby. Drake was able to avoid an expensive extortion case this time, but not without costly blows to his time, well-being, and reputation. Number 3. Medicare COVID. Phone-based scams are on the rise. You've likely experienced these phone scams before. One woman in Perth, Australia, lost $60,000 to one of these scams. When Storm Tate received a text saying she owed $1 for her children's school COVID-19 test kit, she didn't think anything of it. She obliged and authorized the $1 transaction. Of course, that isn't where the fraud would stop. Tate received a message informing her that fraudsters gained access to her bank account because she sent that dollar over the phone. A bank employee then called her to discuss the situation. He told her that she needed to transfer all of her savings to keep her account safe. She did just that. She made 3 payments totaling $60,000. Unfortunately for Storm Tate, that bank employee was actually one of the criminals scamming her out of her life savings. The scammer posed as a bank employee and convinced Tate to send her money straight into his own account. That same scammer stole $35,000 from a famous Australian news host, Jess Ridley, using the exact same scam. It's important to always remain vigilant. In that light, there are a few steps you can take to both identify scams and protect yourself from suspicious communications. They're often disguised to look like a local number, and most of the time there's a recorded voice on the other end trying to convince you to reveal personal information, bank account numbers, or social security information. Sometimes there's a real person on the other end of the line telling you they're with the FBI or a government agency. And even though people block numbers and join do not call lists, these robocallers still find ways to beat your best attempts to restrict them. Before the pandemic, robocalls hit a historical high. According to some studies, there were close to 5.7 billion robocalls in October of 2019. After the pandemic hit, that monthly number dropped to around 3 billion. Many of these robocalls come from call centers, and since COVID shut down these public spaces in 2020, there were less calls. Now that the world has opened back up, the numbers have jumped back to 4.1 billion per month. These scammers automate the process by using computers that dial multiple numbers simultaneously. By casting such a wide net, they only need to connect with a fraction of their calls. There are many steps you can take to stop these scammers, but there is no perfect call blocking strategy. Unfortunately, sometimes these scammers get through. Be wary if you receive any threatening or fear-invoking communication. If anybody reaches out telling you that you have unpaid bills or a warrant out for your arrest, it's possible somebody is trying to scare you into contacting them. Also, if you receive a call or text from a number longer than 10 digits, don't engage. Scammers will often slightly misspell words to get around certain software, so scams frequently contain typos. Watch out! You can purchase and download a call blocking tool for your phone. If you do receive a voicemail, don't call the number left in the message. Instead, find an official number on a bill or a company website and call them with those verified credentials. If you receive a suspicious text, don't respond. Make sure you don't click on any links in the text either. As a general rule, don't respond to any suspicious requests for contact. Make sure you update your phone software to include the latest robocall blocking systems. Remember, you can always report unwanted communications to the FCC or other law enforcement agencies. It's better to err on the side of caution than risk an enormous monetary loss. There's nothing wrong with verifying the validity of a number before engaging. Number 2, stolen gas. As we all know, gas is crazy expensive right now. The higher the prices go, the harder it is for people to take care of simple life tasks, like driving to work and school. When gas prices become too expensive, hardworking folks have to make very difficult decisions. Sometimes, people have to choose between driving to work or buying medication. It's no surprise that as gas becomes more and more valuable, it also becomes a target for thieves. As we all know, criminals will always try to find a new way to steal, but now their methods are becoming extremely technical. Thieves are now attaching pipes to commercial trucks in order to take gas from gas stations. These homemade fuel tankers can drain a gas station of thousands of dollars worth of gas. These gas crooks understand how to adjust the gears in the gas pump in order to drain everything inside and collect this liquid gold. In places like Nevada, they will often drive the gas to states with higher gas prices like California to maximize their return. Sadly, these extremely advanced tactics aren't the only criminal methods thieves use. While crooks are finding more and more advanced ways to steal gas, there has also been an uptick in more primitive strategies as well. Many people wake up and go to start their car, only to find their gas tank empty, even when it was full the night before. For those willing to sneak underneath cars, they will poke holes in the gas tanks to drain a vehicle's contents. If your gas tank is suspiciously empty, make sure you don't have any holes near or around your gas tank. Sometimes the most effective crimes are the simplest crimes. There was a man recently caught swapping gas nozzles at the station. Security cameras caught him swapping nozzles at the pump. Then, the gas crook waited for his target to arrive. When an unsuspecting man pulled up to the gas tank on the other side, he thought he was filling up his own car. Instead, he was using the wrong nozzle while the criminal stood on the other side filling up his own tank with the other guy's gas. Gas prices hit historical highs this year after Russia invaded Ukraine. Western countries rely so heavily on Russian gas that when the US and other countries placed sanctions on Russia, gas prices shot up. Of course, the world was already dealing with inflated gas prices because of the various burdens that the COVID-19 pandemic placed on the world economy and global supply chains. In July of 2022, President Biden met with Saudi Arabian leaders in Jeddah to discuss a variety of global issues, including the environment, human rights, and oil. Along with pushing world leaders to release more oil in hopes of lowering gas prices, Biden also asked American companies to produce more gas. In June of 2022, the national average for gas prices broke $5 per gallon. There was a bit of relief in July as the national average dropped to $4.67 per gallon. For reference, that national average is up $1.50 per gallon from July 2021. As of July 2022, however, national gas prices were above $4 per gallon in every single state. Sadly for California residents of the Golden State, were paying an average of over $6 per gallon in July of 2022. Some analytics companies show Americans averaging about $450 per month for gas. Analysis from credit and debit card companies show American households that make $50,000 or less are now averaging about 10% of all their spending on gas. Number 1. Crypto romance. The FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, shows that targets of romance scams have lost over $1.3 billion in the past 5 years. You might think that's a lot, but this next number is staggering. The FTC reported romance scams made up for $547 million in scammed money in 2021 alone. That's roughly an 80% increase from 2020. The median loss for each target in 2021 was $2,400, according to the FTC. These scams don't even have to occur on dating apps. While dating apps are a great place for scammers to hunt, they also contact their targets on various social media platforms. Once these romance crooks feel like they have a strong connection to their target, they'll claim that they have some sort of problem that they don't have the money to handle. These fake claims often revolve around health issues, emergencies, or other fabricated tragedies that require money. Sometimes the targets don't even lose their own money. The scammer will convince their target to transfer funds for one reason or another, and it turns out they're using their target to help them secretly launder money. Of course, it's emotionally detrimental for a person to learn that their long-distance romantic relationship is a fraud, but it also can be financially detrimental if the scammer succeeds in stealing significant amounts of money. As you most likely know, cryptocurrency allows users to transfer money without a centralized governing body to oversee everything. As a result, it's a prime place for scammers to steal money. In 2021, $139 million of romance scam funds came through crypto. While the median individual loss to romance scams in 2021 was $2,400, the median loss over cryptocurrency in 2021 was $9,770. Still, the most common method scammers used to collect their money was through gift cards. 1/4 of 2021's romance scam targets provided funds via gift cards. Sadly, the hardest hit targets were over 70 years old, averaging a loss of close to $9,000 per target. Younger targets between 18 and 29 years old only lost $750 on average. While scammers hit elderly targets specifically hard, they also go after ladies above 40 years old who were disabled, divorced, or widowed. Even scarier, these numbers are likely a huge underestimate, being that many romance scam targets are often embarrassed and unwilling to report the fraud. In Tennessee, Nicole Hutchison lost $390,000 to a crypto-based romance scam. When her mother died, Nicole inherited a large sum of money. Her plan was to restart her life in California. She joined a dating app, Hinge, to meet new people ahead of her move. She met a man on that dating site who talked about all the money he made investing in crypto. Then the man talked her into investing in crypto too. He convinced Nicole that she would be able to support herself and her family on the proceeds. Sadly, once she tried to withdraw her money, Hutchison found it was all gone. She wasn't investing her money into cryptocurrencies, she was transferring her money into the private digital wallets of the scammers. These scams became so prevalent that this last Valentine's Day, TikTok issued a warning to be wary of romance scams. Sites like Hinge employ content moderators to identify potential scammers, but there are so many people on these sites, scammers will always be able to hide. Still, there are steps you can take in order to protect yourself and your family against these criminals. First, never give any bank, financial, personal, or identifying information to anybody that you meet online until you have verified their legitimacy. Also, don't tell anybody how much money you have and definitely how much you're worth. This would only encourage them to come after you and help them determine exactly how much money to go for. Next, check the profile and the picture of your new love interest. You can even do a reverse image search on Google to make sure your new love connection didn't rip their profile picture from somebody else online. If someone you've never met in person asks you for money, you should absolutely be concerned. If they ask for money via cryptocurrency or gift cards, it's a huge red flag. Run far, far away. If someone asks for pictures of you that you wouldn't want your mom to see, don't send them. Scammers will blackmail you for money using incriminating photos. Trust your gut and don't ignore the warning signs. If you don't feel safe or you feel like you're the target of a scam, just don't do it.
When the feds trekked to Las Vegas and banged on Ponzi scammer Matthew Beasley's door, they weren't entirely shocked to see him pull a gun. The surprise came when he pointed the piece at his own head. You'd think a man with nothing left to lose would simply start blasting, but instead, Beasley hesitated. He didn't blow himself away, and no agents got hurt. Instead, he took the gun off himself and made a sweeping motion across the agents at his door. He didn't take particular aim or fire a shot, but the threatening gesture was enough to spur action. Agents opened fire at close range. The low-life lawyer took lead in his chest and shoulders, but refused to go down. The standoff, if it can be called that, continued for 4 hours. Beasley refused to surrender, but did talk with negotiators for a while. Somehow, the bleeding man held his ground until finally a SWAT team got involved. The whole thing didn't go the way just about anybody would have expected, nor did it end as expected. He confessed to everything right on the spot. The raid was reportedly brought on by a tip from Hindenburg Research, a firm specializing in an odd investigating tactic known as short selling. When they got indirectly involved with the scam through a tip from an accountant, founder Nate Anderson made it no secret that he thought something was up. Despite everything Beasley and his people did to make the scam appear legitimate, and it was a heck of a lot, Anderson claimed he saw right through the whole thing. He used some old connections to set up circumstances that would allow him to secretly listen in on the runners of the suspected scam during a private jet flight. After Hindenburg started getting tips from clients about the scam, Anderson talked to some of the tipsters. One of them was linked to Mark Holt, an old classmate of Judd's that runs a jet charter business. The folks who wound up on board the flight were some of the on-the-ground marketers that helped Judd and Beasley sell the scam. In a conversation with the crew, one of them said that buyers thought the deal was so good that it may be a Ponzi scheme. That confirmed Anderson's suspicions and told him all he needed to know. He filed a whistleblower report with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and before long, the FBI had boots on the ground. Beasley had become a lawyer back in 2016 and had never been in trouble with the law before. This was his first rodeo, so while he was an integral piece of the puzzle, he didn't exactly run the show. That honor went to business owners Jeffrey Judd and Christopher Humphreys, who jointly owned and operated many of the largely illegitimate businesses involved in the scam. The main business involved was J&J Purchasing, which was used as a shell company for a good chunk of the scam. J&J Holdings was also used in operations, mostly for money laundering. The spread of the scam was almost entirely perpetuated by word of mouth, making in-person marketing absolutely vital. The 3 men reportedly targeted affluent folks that they or their marketers had something in common with. Churches, country clubs, and gyms were among the most straightforward hunting grounds. Legal documents in the case named 4 pairs of boots on the ground aside from the 3 scammers and insinuate that there were likely more. Naturally, a number of businessmen that may or may not be operating the way they claim are also involved. Legal documentation names a staggering 22 defendants. Despite the sheer size of the operation, the scam didn't exactly bring in the billions. When it fell apart, about $449 million had been fleeced from victims across the U.S. The setup for the scam was a slow burner. For its 5-year run, almost all the victims probably had no idea they were being strung along. In fact, a little simple math reveals that some of the earliest adopters may have already doubled their initial investments. You're probably familiar with how a standard Ponzi scheme works. The scammer lures people in to invest, promising great returns and low risks. As new investors jump on board, their money funds the promised payouts for the older crop of investors. Rinse and repeat until the money somehow runs short at the bottom of the ladder, be it from a lack of new investors or from the scammers taking too much off the top. The scam is that, but far more complex. This particular scam jumped through a number of hoops to add a layer of legitimacy that fooled thousands of people into parting with their cash. The nationwide reach and very real legal presence of Beasley's law firm made it possible to cast such a wide net. In fact, the scam actively used Beasley's connections to make it sound more legitimate. Beasley, being a lawyer, sat at the center of how the scam worked. Buyers were convinced that they would be funding early payouts for tort winners. In fact, Beasley and his team referenced a slip and fall case that they would allegedly be handling. The buyers' returns would come from fees, long-term payments, and interest tied to the case winners getting their funds early. On the surface, it all looked pretty straightforward. Taking a closer look at what the scammers were asking clients to do makes it clear that something was up. For starters, clients are being asked to not only chip in to jump on board, but to reinvest and renew after 90 days. That initial pay-in for most buyers was set at an eye-watering $80,000 minimum. Coincidentally, that's when victims were promised their first payouts with at least 10% returns. That part was done away with in later versions of the contract, as if the scammers figured out that was sus and decided to find another way to get more cash from each victim. The madness doesn't stop there. They also had to wire money into a lawyer-run account, which is normally a big red flag. On top of that, they had to set up an LLC, making a business entity in their name to get their payouts. As a cherry on top, buyers had to commit to making a purchase between Thursday and Sunday, then get the money over on the next Monday or Tuesday. The weird scheduling and all the struggles just to buy in, let alone to get your cash out, made the whole operation seem, at the very least, kind of odd. The only real reason that the scam didn't fall through before it even began was because it mirrors a very real investment strategy. Lawyers that help clients with personal injury and other cases involving client payouts are almost always willing to let outside firms help with payments. If you've ever heard the infamous J.G. Wentworth 877 Cash Now jingle, you've heard of a business that does what these scammers said they were doing. The way it was all working in reality, behind the scenes, can explain a lot of the weirdness. For starters, that lawyer-run trust account, Beasley had direct access to it and was skimming from it to put cash into other accounts for other tasks, and, of course, directly into his and his associates' pockets. This means that a single account is moving massive sums in multiple directions. It's no wonder the scammers wanted to work with large transactions and have significant delays built in. There's no shortage of rich suckers out there, so Beasley and his friends kept the party rolling from 2017 all the way until 2022. They were taking in at least $80,000 per client and paying out only $8,000 to $10,000 per client up to 90 days later. This means that one new investor will fund at least 10 old ones for 90 days. Simple math, but what does it all mean? This scam could have kept going indefinitely without anybody catching on. In terms of Ponzi schemes, it was as close to perfect as you could get. The biggest hang-up, aside from getting caught, was just how much the crew were pocketing. Like any enterprise, the men at the top walked away with the lion's share of the take. The small partners like marketers and cover-up people were paid something, of course. Details on how that played out for them were sparse. The big boy prizes, meanwhile, were shown off in a bit more detail. Beasley and others at or near the top used investors' money for all sorts of creature comforts. Private jets, lavish homes, and rental properties were just the tip of the iceberg. Nice cars were also on the list, including luxury models from Aston Martin, Bentley, Porsche, and more. One of the scammers even nabbed a Rolls-Royce, the poster vehicle for "I have way too much money." As far as criminal charges, the case is still up in the air. The only one to catch any charges so far has been Beasley, and they weren't money-related. His stunt with the gun when the FBI arrived got him charged with assaulting a federal officer. On the civil side, though, things are really heating up. As of this writing, the SEC has filed suit against 6 of the individuals involved, along with all their companies and holdings. The commission is seeking an injunction on any financial activity by the defendants, wants them to repay what they've bilked from investors, and is putting unspecified civil penalties on top. As if things weren't looking bad enough for our scammy 6, many of the investors are coming forward and filing lawsuits of their own. With so many targets to go after, some of the scammers and marketers are catching personal suits and actions against their companies. At the center of it all is Beasley, who's facing a class action lawsuit against him personally. The action was started by 3 jilted investors, ex-cop Paul Maloff and business owners Elizabeth Lewis and Brad Maloff. They charged that Beasley orchestrated the whole thing and was controlling the flow of funds using a Wells Fargo account that was under his personal control. As of this writing, the floodgates are open for anybody who's been burned to jump on board. As of September 2022, the case is ongoing. Criminal charges related to financial misconduct have yet to be filed against anybody involved. Cops did serve search warrants at the homes of the defendants, but aren't ready to release what they've found at the moment. Beasley is being held without bail for his criminal charges. Whether he gets off easy on the criminal charges or not, Beasley is going to have it hard when this all blows over. Nevada's bar chief, Dan Hodge, is looking into the incident personally to see if a disciplinary sanction should be issued. Since Beasley used his status as a lawyer to run the scam, he's almost certainly going to be disbarred. Forging a new career from the ground up probably won't be easy for someone who was heading up a law firm and had been a lawyer career for well over a decade. The scam involved a large number of small businesses, mostly owned by the defendants. But one specific bank on the outside is also catching heat. Federal laws require banks to monitor customers' financial activity to look for anything suspicious. Because the transactions at the core of the whole scam went on right under their noses, Wells Fargo is also named in the class action lawsuit.
On a summer morning in July, Steve Vogelsang walked into a branch of the Royal Bank in Regina, British Columbia, with a fake bomb strapped to his chest. Vogelsang slipped a note to the bank teller saying, "Give this man $50,000. Tears welled in his eyes as he told the teller that someone was holding his grandson hostage and whispered, "Please help me." The woman behind the counter put down $400 in $20 bills, all she had in her desk. By the time police arrived, Vogelsang was far gone. According to the Globe and Mail, he was so freaked out by the experience that he left the bank without even taking the money. It was his first heist, but it wouldn't be his last. You would think that Vogelsang would be the last person to ever desperately need money. At the peak of his career, he had a car allowance, golf membership, wardrobe curated by Harry Rosen, free haircuts, and lots of other celebrity perks. He hosted charitable events and was a valued board member of the Humane Society, Winnipeg Harvest, and Winnipeg Symphony. Huge billboards with Vogelsang's face appeared all over Winnipeg. He was a true city celebrity. He began his broadcasting career in Prince Albert in 1989 and moved to Winnipeg in 1992. In the 1990s, he was one of the most recognizable faces in Manitoba as a long-loved broadcaster. He covered sports on CTV's Evening News. Then he became the head of the newsroom. His co-workers thought of Vogelsang as a true talent who always nailed it on the first cut. He never read from a script and always brought a sense of humor to the set. He had a good heart and didn't shy away from making jokes about the athletes. Vogelsang changed the tone of TV news. Though reporters were pretty strict and formal, he wasn't afraid to say provocative or offensive things. His Plays of the Week was often a highlight reel of the worst player performances, with NHL athletes falling on the ice or shooting goals into their own nets. He catered his content to everyone, not just extreme sports fans, unlike many other sportscasters on the air. Some of his most famous pieces centered on a one-handed quarterback and a concert pianist who doubled as a setter for the national volleyball team. He focused on the stories behind the players, not just the sports games themselves. In 1995, the Jets left Winnipeg for Phoenix, so a lot of the excitement of local sports disappeared with them. Vogelsang shifted his career into upper management as the news director for CTV Winnipeg. But in that position, he found his creativity was stunted and only provided admin support and resources to his employees. It was still before the big internet boom, but Vogelsang still knew that television news was on a slow decline. Vogelsang saw the writing on the wall and decided to jump ship. In 2002, he became a faculty member at Red River College's new campus in the Winnipeg Exchange District. By the age of 39, the Saskatoon native was running one of the country's top broadcasting programs. Many future broadcasters cited Vogelsang for their success. He was a popular instructor, taking great care to remember each student's name and get to know all of them individually. He kept in touch with his former students, coached them on their careers, and networked on their behalf. One student called him, quote, "the most inspirational teacher I've ever had." Another said a reference from Steve Vogelsang was like a golden ticket, but Vogelsang was harboring a deep secret. 9 years later, after starting his position at Red River College, Vogelsang saw himself as falling out of touch with the journalism industry he once knew so well. So when Laura, his wife of 20 years, received a job opportunity in Nelson, British Columbia, where they had a retirement home, Vogelsang decided to go with her. He thought he could teach communications at the local community college. As a couple without children, heading into their retirement years, Vogelsang was ready to make enjoying life his priority. When he announced he was retiring from Red River College, the hashtag "Steve, don't leave" trended on Twitter. 300 people attended his Steve-a-Palooza farewell party, complete with a band and a Hummer limo for his family. His close friends flew in from across the country for the event. So going from being a Winnipeg celebrity to a Nelson nobody wasn't easy for Vogelsang. In 3 years, he applied for 50 jobs and got one, a 3-month teaching contract. Desperate for income and something to do, he briefly worked at a Toyota dealership before his worsening depression made it too hard to get out of bed and go to work in the morning. Vogelsang was no stranger to depression, but he made Laura promise not to tell anyone about his struggles with mental health. He didn't want anyone to see past the smart, funny, charming man people saw on TV. Even his closest friends had no idea. Vogelsang started taking antidepressants in 2008, but he felt so good that he decided he no longer needed them. He saw leaving Winnipeg as the perfect time to make the change to going medication-free. But a few months later, he suffered what he called a complete emotional collapse. He spent his days sleeping and watching TV. He hardly ever even changed his clothes. Laura encouraged him to take small steps to fight the depression, by washing the dishes or taking their dog for a walk, but he just wanted to go back to sleep. In 2014, Vogelsang received a job offer to be the vice president of the Jets' parent company, True North Sports and Entertainment. He and Laura moved back to Winnipeg. It seemed like things were finally starting to turn around. But the job didn't work out. Vogelsang didn't have HR experience and quit before they had the chance to fire him. He felt like a failure. In addition to those 3 depression-riddled years in Nelson, Vogelsang was at his wit's end. He engaged with the dark secret he thought he left behind 3 years ago. He was having an affair with one of his former students at Red River College. They began an on and off relationship that lasted for years. Now back in Winnipeg, they reconnected. In May of 2015, a full year after the thought initially crossed his mind, Vogelsang told Laura he was leaving her. He packed his things while Laura was at work and practiced his speech through tears. He told her that he changed, but didn't mention the affair because he thought it would just make her more upset. Laura, who thought she was coming home to a couple's dinner at their favorite restaurant, was completely shocked to see Vogelsang's things packed in a truck. She never learned about the affair from him and only found out in the Winnipeg Free Press many months later. Vogelsang's career and marriage weren't the only things hitting rock bottom. His finances were also a mess. He and Laura lost $85,000 on the sale of 3 properties they owned in Nelson. Upon their return to Winnipeg, they entered a high bid for a home they wanted in the city's upscale neighborhood of River Heights. When they tried to sell it for what they paid for it 2 years later, no one was interested. Vogelsang owed more on the mortgage than the house was worth. He didn't want to accept the loss and waited a few more months, hoping a buyer would come through. He went back to teaching on a contract at Red River College, but it still wasn't enough to cover the $3,200 per month mortgage. By 2016, he was lost in his mounting depression. The debts were getting higher. His friends didn't stand by him during the divorce. He was gaining weight. He stopped answering the phone, and his behavior became increasingly unstable and bitter. He was cruel towards his ex-wife and became emotionally abusive. Laura felt like she lost the man she once married. His relationship with his former student also started declining. It ended badly in 2016 with the woman filing a restraining order against him. Vogelsang violated the order 3 times. His ex-girlfriend told the judge she didn't know who he was anymore. As if it couldn't get any worse, a week before the fall semester in fall 2017, Vogelsang received word that his teaching contract was not renewed at Red River College. He had nothing left. He had to borrow $10,000 from a friend, $2,000 from an uncle, and $2,000 from a college roommate. But with $15,000 in credit card debt, he hardly saw a way out. He resorted to eating rice and beans that he bought wholesale. By October, his home faced foreclosure, but he was desperate to maintain his reputation. Vogelsang had an idea: rob a bank. He thought that this was the perfect way to clear his debts while taking money from an institution rather than a person. In his mind, robbing banks didn't hurt anyone and would only help the situation. His first heist took place at a bank in Regina. It was the farthest branch from the city police station, which would give him extra time to escape. While he came into that bank with a fake bomb strapped to his chest, he decided to let go of that idea in future heists. The story he used, though, stayed roughly the same. He always chose a bank on the edge of a city and parked his car near a park. He tried to conduct the heist towards the end of the day when there were fewer people in the branch. He gave the teller a note asking for $2,500. He thought this was the perfect amount to request, hoping the teller would be able to find the money quickly and not tell anyone. Unlike TV bank robberies, Vogelsang never ran away from the crime. He got his cash and walked leisurely back to his car, throwing his jacket jacket and sweatpants into the garbage and continued in the jeans and blazer he was wearing underneath. One time, he walked into a nearby bar just to watch the drama unfold between the police and the bank while he ordered a drink. Vogelsang was finally able to support himself, and he was getting confident in his bank robbing skills. A bit too confident. On the evening of October 20th, 2017, he made the incriminating decision to park his car in Royal Bank's empty parking lot. He was feeling lazy and didn't want to walk all the way back to his car like he usually did. After leaving the bank with $14,000 in hand, a woman drove into the bank's parking lot just as Vogelsang was driving out. She remembered what his car looked like, a red truck with a black top, and was able to describe it to the police later. The next day, police found Vogelsang's truck behind the Medicine Hat Lodge where he was staying in the jacuzzi room. On October 21st at 3 in the morning, he answered a call from the front desk telling him to head downstairs immediately because the carbon monoxide alarm was going off. He had a hunch that his crime spree was over. As soon as he opened the front door of his motel room, 3 armed officers surrounded him. 9 others yelled, "Freeze!" told him to get on the ground. He began to kneel down when an officer punched him in the kidneys, causing him to fall forward and lay face down into the carpet. He wasn't scared, he was relieved. It was finally over. His lawyer, Greg White, made excuses. He told the court that Vogelsang committed the robberies only because he hit rock bottom after suffering a deep depression and unsuccessfully applying to more than 50 jobs. He begged the court for a 3-year sentence instead of 6, which would be tacked on to his other 5-year sentence. White said Vogelsang was depressed and taking ineffective medications which caused him to make poor decisions. He said Vogelsang didn't have a previous criminal record and conducted every robbery unarmed. 11 people provided character witnesses to the court, some from former students. In an audio clip from jail, Vogelsang apologized to the bank employees he traumatized, the family and friends he embarrassed, and the students he let down. His legendary broadcaster voice was still intact. Vogelsang pleaded guilty. In October 2019, he was sentenced to 18 months for 2 robberies he committed in Medicine Hat in 2017. This was added on to the previous 5-year sentence he received for 4 robberies he committed in Alberta and Saskatoon. Vogelsang lives in a 9 by 15-foot cell at Drumheller Institution. He started antipsychotic medications and finally started feeling like himself again. Overall, his prison experience hasn't been half bad. Fellow inmates tell him it's cool that an older man had the courage to commit bank robberies. He's made friends in prison. He's lost weight, and he still exercises every day. He has a job as a painter. His closest friends are around his age, but he spends his lunch hour talking to the younger inmates, hoping to inspire them and give them the attention they so desperately seek. Vogelsang spent his first 2 years in prison deeply remorseful about what he did, but now he looks back on the career and reputation he completely destroyed and sees it as a unique opportunity to build himself up again from scratch. He knows he will never be able to go back to Winnipeg or Saskatchewan, but he's optimistic. He got 2 prison tattoos to represent the new identity he has taken on as an aging ex-con. In December of 2021, esteemed Pennsylvania dentist Dr. Lawrence Rudolph was arrested and charged with the mysterious passing of his wife. Authorities believe Dr. Lawrence took her life to cash in on a hefty life insurance policy which amounted to $4.8 million. During their investigation, police uncovered some bizarre details about Lawrence's life that only made his case look worse than it already was. On paper, Dr. Lawrence is a successful dentist from Pennsylvania. His life seemed great. However, those who knew the Rudolphs knew there was much more going on behind the bright white smiles, particularly Lawrence's relationship with his wife, Bianca. They'd been married for 34 years up until her passing in 2016. The couple met while Lawrence was in school in Pittsburgh. They fell in love and got married in 1982. Lawrence and Bianca spent those 34 years building a family and a successful dental practice. They had 2 beautiful children and 2 homes, one in Pittsburgh, one in Arizona. By all appearances, the Rudolphs were living the good life, ripe with money, family, and prestige. In reality, the couple was just going through the motions. But why stay together for that long? Well, according to their friends, Lawrence and Bianca had their unique reasons. Lawrence, they say, was always obsessed with money. He built a business using his own time, talents, and money in his mind. The company and any profits earned from it were his by right. In the event of a divorce, Lawrence knew that he would lose at least half of his assets and cash. The breadwinning spouse almost always has to support the spouse who makes less money, especially if that spouse doesn't work at all. In other words, Lawrence wouldn't divorce Bianca because he didn't want to lose his money. On the other hand, Bianca had a more righteous reason for not divorcing Lawrence. She was Catholic. Traditionally, Catholics do not acknowledge a legal divorce. According to Catholic doctrine, the marriage is still active in the eyes of God, meaning that Bianca, a devout Catholic, would have been breaking religious law if she'd entered into another relationship after divorcing Larry. Entering into a relationship with someone outside the church or remarrying outside the church is prohibited, potentially resulting in excommunication. For a devout Catholic, excommunication is one of the worst things that can happen. For that reason, Bianca wanted to avoid breaking the rules at all costs, even if that meant staying married to Larry in a loveless marriage. That was their relationship, according to friends, and the division only got worse from there. Since he wasn't getting much love and attention from Bianca, and vice versa, Lawrence started seeing several mistresses on the side. Clearly, he didn't adhere to the same religious rule. Authorities now believe that one of those mistresses is responsible for coaxing Lawrence to take Bianca's life. Every doctor's office needs receptionists and medical assistants. Lawrence's Pennsylvania dentist's office was no exception. Dr. Lawrence owned Three Rivers Dental Group, which served as the parent company to 5 smaller dentist offices all around Pennsylvania. His main office was in Greensburg, a town outside of Pittsburgh. Needless to say, Lawrence was a successful dentist and an economic pillar of his community. CBS News estimates that Dr. Lawrence was worth around $28 million. Naturally, many young dental professionals in the Pittsburgh area wanted to work for Dr. Lawrence. One employee, a manager named Lori Milleron, caught Lawrence's attention. Lori started working at Three Rivers Group in the early 2000s. At some point, over the next 20 years, Lori and Lawrence engaged in a passionate love affair. The affair, however, morphed into a more serious relationship as the years went by, until Lori decided she was tired of playing second fiddle. After being with Dr. Lawrence for so long, Lori eventually wanted more. She felt like she was the true woman in Lawrence's life and shouldn't have to play second best to a wife he didn't even care about. So, she gave Lawrence a 1-year ultimatum to leave Bianca and sell his dental businesses. Lawrence gave in to the ultimatum, but still faced a major problem. How would he leave Bianca without divorcing her and losing half of his money? According to authorities, Lawrence decided the best option was to take Bianca out and not on a date. Though he still needed a way to get rid of her without getting caught, leading the wealthy dentist to devise a plan involving their favorite hobby, big game hunting. Lawrence was arguably more enthusiastic about hunting than dentistry. And, though she didn't grow up hunting, Bianca was just as passionate about tracking down and shooting big game animals. Their Facebook pages are filled with pictures of Lawrence and Bianca posing next to a large exotic animal they shot with guns in hand. But they did much more than just participate in the high-end sport. Lawrence, ever the entrepreneur, was the former president of Safari Club International after working as the chief's communication officer. Lawrence was also the president of the Weatherby Foundation, an international hunting organization. So it was normal and not at all suspicious when he and Bianca flew to Zambia for a hunting trip to shoot a leopard. Lawrence didn't do much hunting during the Zambia trip, oddly enough. The goal of the trip was for Bianca to shoot a leopard, so Lawrence stayed back while his wife pursued the big exotic cat. The hunt began on September 27th, and even after 2 weeks of pursuit, the couple still couldn't track the leopard down. Instead, Bianca hunted several other animals. On the morning of October 11th, the couple decided it was time to leave camp. Around 5:30 a.m., their hunting guide heard a loud boom while eating in the nearby mess hall. But moments later, Lawrence screamed for help. He rushed towards their cabin and found Bianca lying on the floor. She'd suffered a violent wound, and an empty shell was on the ground next to her. The police arrived and interviewed Lawrence, who gave them his account of the accident. Lawrence told Zambian police that he was in the shower when he heard the gunshot. He then jumped out, did everything he could, called for help when his efforts failed. He told investigators that she must have accidentally discharged the weapon while putting it back in the case. The Zambian authorities allowed Lawrence to leave after taking care of his wife's funeral arrangements. When he got home, however, things got weird. When you're the breadwinner of the family, it's common to take out a life insurance policy in case something happens. That way, your family and loved ones are cared for financially. Bianca was not the breadwinner in her and Lawrence's marriage. It made no sense to take out a policy on her. However, records show that Lawrence took out not 1, not 2, but 7 policies on his wife. The total insurance payout, as mentioned earlier, $4.8 million. Apparently, Lawrence felt he shouldn't let a money-making opportunity slide by. Whether planned or not, the slick move signaled suspicion to outside observers, aka official investigators, as did Lawrence's bizarre activity after Bianca's funeral. The police were already looking into Dr. Lawrence long before Bianca's funeral. After the accident, Lawrence requested for Bianca's body to be cremated as soon as the funeral was over. His request was eventually granted. Meanwhile, Lawrence's 2 children were trying to call him. According to records, he ignored them for days. They didn't even know what happened until a week after the fact. Perhaps to throw the police off his trail, Lawrence invested some serious cash into Bianca's funeral. From the outside looking in, he did everything he could to give his wife a proper send-off. Then he dropped the ball. The day after the funeral, Lawrence hopped on a flight to Las Vegas. Initially, he'd booked a flight for Lori to take her from Pittsburgh to Phoenix. However, Lori's flight got canceled the same day, so he flew a different woman out to Vegas and met up with her instead. Lawrence says he was publicly declaring his relationship with this woman, but investigators were still skeptical. Consular chief from the U.S. Embassy felt uneasy about Lawrence's story from the get-go. The chief, a former Marine, examined Bianca's body at the funeral home, focusing on her chest wounds. He determined that the shot was fired from at least 6.5 feet, if not 8 feet away. The discovery blew a massive hole in Lawrence's story. According to him, Bianca hit point blank. However, judging by the spread of the wounds, the chief determined that was impossible. Knowing the body would soon be cremated, the chief snapped pictures of Bianca's chest wounds and left the funeral home. Later on, Lawrence found out the chief had taken pictures of his wife's body without permission. He was furious. A different investigation conducted by a Colorado medical examiner concluded that, in their opinion, Lawrence's story was impossible. Lawrence claimed that the trigger was pulled from inside the case, or Bianca pulled the trigger accidentally with her hands. The examiner explained that the inside of the case couldn't have pulled the trigger, and Bianca's arms were too short to reach the trigger while pointing the muzzle at her chest. For example, Bianca was only 5'4", and the brown 12-gauge shotgun was at least 28 inches long. The FBI conducted a reach test during their investigation and concluded that Bianca couldn't have reached the trigger even if she'd wanted to. Federal investigators also talked to people that knew the Rudolphs. Lawrence and Bianca's friends told authorities all they knew, giving Lawrence a motive, was money. Their 5-year investigation yielded other pieces of evidence, including witness testimonies of people who were in Zambia at the time of Bianca's accident. One key witness was the hunting guide's wife. She told federal investigators she saw Lawrence bribe Zambian officials into cremating Bianca's body as quickly as possible. Witnesses were even more puzzled by Lawrence refusing to answer his children's phone calls. Lawrence told the consulate chief that the kids calling him were from his previous marriage and not related to Bianca by blood. A crappy excuse, but one that would ultimately hold up in court. The FBI also talked to a former Three Rivers employee who told them about the ultimatum and Lawrence's affair with Lori. Between the reach test, the witness testimony, and the life insurance claims, the feds had enough evidence to finally slap the cuffs on the evil dentist. The FBI chose to arrest Lawrence in Cabo, Mexico for legal reasons. They had plenty of evidence, but it was circumstantial. Federal authorities apprehended Lawrence in Mexico, where the allegedly self-made widower was vacationing for the winter. Agents sent Lawrence back to the United States on charges of capital crimes and wire fraud, though proving he did either will be tough due to the lack of concrete evidence. Lawrence's attorney has called the case a witch hunt, arguing that Bianca's passing was a terrible accident and that both the insurance companies and investigators agreed with Lawrence's story. His trial started in February of 2022. While Lawrence is in jail awaiting trial, who's running his businesses? Three Rivers has completely erased Dr. Lawrence from the company website. As of May 2022, the operation is headed by Dr. Anna Rudolph, Lawrence and Bianca's daughter, who appears to have taken over the business from her father, according to the company's website. That, or she's a supermodel posing as a dentist. The negative publicity stemming from the Fed's accusations has tarnished Lawrence's reputation, possibly for the rest of his life. He may win his trial in court, but he's certainly lost in the court of public opinion. Click here to watch one of these. What happens when family members run a scam together? Let's get right into it. Number 4, campaign madness. Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter and his wife Margaret Hunter mishandled more than $250,000 that they received in campaign funds, putting it towards personal expenses and forging false campaign finance records. Duncan Hunter was exposed to the political sphere very young when his father was a member of Congress for 14 terms. In 2007, Duncan Lee Hunter, Duncan's father, announced that as part of his presidential bid, he would not seek re-election to the House of Representatives and retired from Congress. Hunter announced his candidacy for his father's seat and in 2008 won the Republican primary with 72% of the vote. He later defeated the Democratic nominee Mike Lumpkin and became the first combat veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan to serve in the U.S. Congress. The couple used campaign funds for many things, including video games, private school tuition, and oral surgery, despite spending campaign funds for personal use being banned by the law. They used the funds for European vacations, ski trips, and hotel most days. Their lives might have seemed glamorous and lavish to outsiders, but the couple was dealing with serious financial struggles. Although Hunter received an annual salary of $174,000 and Margaret was paid $3,000 a month as his campaign manager, their bank accounts overdrew more than 1,100 times over 7 years, and the bank charged them $37,761 in overdraft and insufficient fund fees. After receiving a shut-off notice, they had to use the campaign credit card for groceries and use donations to pay their water bill. Financial pressure led to the family selling their home and moving in with Hunter's father. The couple disguised their transactions as campaign-related, like creating official government business at sites they were visiting on vacation. The Federal Election Commission, FEC, and the San Diego Union Tribune began questioning campaign expenses in April 2016. Hunter asserted his innocence countless times, refusing to admit his guilt or resign his seat when the charges were released to the public. One of Hunter's attorneys, Gregory A. Vega, attacked the prosecutor's credibility with the U.S. Attorney's Office and wanted them recused. He claimed that two of the prosecutors attended a 2015 fundraiser for Democrat Hillary Clinton, which would make them biased against Hunter. Amongst the suspicious purchases that Hunter made to his campaign was a vacation to Italy, which he told his campaign treasurer was military defense related. Later, in an email, Margaret Hunter told a friend how great the family trip had been. Hunter fought allegations of wrongdoing by making his chief of staff deny that the trip was a family vacation to the press. In 2016, the Office of Congressional Ethics recommended that the Ethics Committee perform a full investigation on the couple. In February 2017, the FBI raided Hunter's campaign offices. Agents seized computers and hard drives, and Hunter was soon under a Department of Justice criminal investigation. Investigators uncovered the scope of the couple's fraudulent spending, which began in 2010 when Hunter started reimbursing his campaign account after Margaret Hunter purchased 12 tickets to see How the Grinch Stole Christmas at the Globe Theater. The couple used campaign funds from 2010 to late 2016, reporting all of their expenses as campaign related to the campaign treasurer. Hunter alleged that one of his many campaign-related trips was a vacation to Las Vegas. A friend that went on the trip described a very different vacation, where they lounged by the pool, went sightseeing, ate out at several restaurants, and went to a show. Hunter attempted to conceal his illegal spending on that trip by scheduling a 20-minute tour of a nearby charter school. When the family's bank account balance was negative, the Hunters put campaign funds towards a date night and a couple's day out at Del Mar Racetrack. They also used funds to celebrate their child's birthday. Again, Hunter justified these expenses as campaign-related to the treasurer. By November 2017, Hunter had repaid over $60,000 to his campaign for what he claimed were mistaken or insufficiently documented expenditures. The couple was indicted in 2018 and charged with unlawfully spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. The pair entered the courtroom separately and had separate legal teams, and they both pleaded not guilty. In June 2019, Hunter pleaded guilty to one count of misusing campaign funds, and Margaret Hunter pleaded guilty to one count of corruption. Court documents showed they spent on small things like movie tickets, groceries, and utilities. They also made elaborate purchases like trips to luxury hotels and even plane tickets for their family rabbits. Margaret acknowledged that she secretly funded thousands of dollars in improper personal purchases using Hunter's campaign funds. Hunter blamed his wife for the crimes, as she was the campaign manager and in charge of finances. He claimed that the $1,000 in video game purchases that investigators uncovered were purchases made by his son. He alleged that the prosecution targeted him as he was one of the earliest supporters of Donald Trump's campaign. U.S. Attorney Mark Conover commended Margaret for her cooperation with investigators, contributing to her sentence of 8 months in home confinement, which began in August 2020. Hunter's attorneys also sought home confinement, but he was sentenced to 11 months federal prison. The House Ethics Committee told Hunter he had to refrain from voting because he pleaded guilty to a federal felony. Later that year, in December, he announced his resignation from Congress. Hunter was supposed to report to prison in La Tuna, Texas in January 2021, but former President Trump pardoned Hunter and Margaret Hunter in December 2020. Number 3. 12 years to scam. Husband and wife, Philip and Laura Borel, along with Laura's mother, Frances Noble, conspired to commit fraud when they convinced Hertfordshire County Council in England that Frances had a brain disorder. The three family members swindled £734,000 from the council as part of a direct payments care package. The scam lasted from August 1st, 2005 to November 30, 2018. Hertfordshire County Council offers care packages to people that are assessed as needing help and want to arrange their care. The council gave the trio access to a direct payments care package to support Frances, who claimed to be unable to feed herself and bedbound, meaning that she needed daily care. The trio put together forged emails Burrells on behalf of caregivers Frances hired to look after her at her home. Over 13 years, Frances received £624,047 from the council. Philip and Laura Burrell took their fraud further when they appeared on the popular British show This Morning. Laura announced on national television that she had dementia. She said that it began when she started to mix her words. She spoke about being dismissed by doctors, describing a neurologist as vile after they didn't believe her. Philip added that she would have episodes where she would struggle with her language or speak incoherently. He also said that she would get confused, especially in the evening. When asked about her prognosis, she said it was too difficult to tell due to her age. The hosts announced that the couple was raising money to spread awareness for the disease and travel so that the pair could enjoy the time they had left together. People became suspicious of the couple's announcement of their diagnosis, including neighbors that noticed the Amazon truck delivering many packages to the Burrells' house. They grew increasingly curious about Philip's job since Laura couldn't work. Neighbors were baffled when the couple purchased a brand new Volvo. They also went on lavish vacations, going to places like Boston, San Francisco, and Canada between 2011 and 2017. Frances raised suspicions in her neighborhood when they saw her walking her dog and unpacking a supermarket food delivery without any signs of physical strain. She claimed that she couldn't leave the house nor do any physical activity. Carers believed that Frances was exaggerating the extent of her needs and reported it to Hertfordshire County Council, who began a fraud investigation. Frances moved to Germany in 2019 when the police opened up an investigation against her, and a few months later, she was joined by Laura and Philip. In June 2020, the three family members pleaded not guilty at St. Albans Crown Court. They changed their pleas to guilty in 2022. The Burrells returned to the UK to appear before the court, but Frances stayed in Berlin and denied any wrongdoing. She said they were running out of money to fight the case, which was the only reason they changed their pleas from not guilty to guilty. Frances was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in jail by St. Albans Court for defrauding Hertfordshire County Council. The judge sentenced Laura Burrell to 3 years and 9 months and Philip Burrell to 4 years and 3 months. Both were charged with money laundering offenses related to fraud. Their crime was one of the largest frauds of its type to be brought to English courts. Number 2. Advertising scams. The owners of Smith Advertising stole $63 million from their 100 victims due to a fraud scheme they conducted from 2008 to 2012. Gary Truman Smith and his son, Gary Todd Smith, ran Smith Advertising, a North Carolina-based company that also had a presence in Florida. Their investors lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some were forced to declare bankruptcy. Smith Advertising began as a legitimate business that did advertising work, but in the mid-2000s, it struggled to stay afloat. Things only got worse when the 2008 financial crisis hit. Other companies might have filed for bankruptcy or restructured their business model, but the father and son were too money-hungry to do either. They solicited investors when the business began to struggle, reaching out to friends, people in their community, churchgoers, and other organizations. The terms of the loans were that investors would give the company money to pre-purchase advertising at a discount, and Smith Advertising would repay them the amount of the loan and give them a cut of the discount. Truman Smith and Todd Smith advertised bridge loans to everyone they knew. A bridge loan is a short-term loan to cover an interval between two transactions and is most commonly used for buying one house and selling another. The company wasn't buying advertising like they told investors. They used the loans to repay old debts and keep the company afloat. Some victims received their promised return from the company, but that money came from another victim's investment. Smith Advertising engaged in factoring, an industry term for companies selling off the money they're owed from one company because they need cash faster. The Smiths didn't have any money coming in. They printed fake invoices and ripped off investors buying debts owed to them. They pretended that it was factoring, but in reality, they were lying to investors. Gary Todd Smith, the son, enjoyed his expensive lifestyle too much to let their scheme fail. He inherited the company from his father, and the pair let out their lavish lifestyles while the business secretly faltered. Todd Smith's love for his lifestyle and pride stopped him from ever declaring bankruptcy, and he wanted to get out of trouble by himself. The debt the company accumulated eventually destroyed them, and at one point, their bank balance was minus $12 million. The Secret Service and FBI were notified that the company's checks were bouncing. Investigators quickly quickly found that the company had performed fraudulent activities. The evidence included 2 sets of company books, one that was legitimate and the other that documented their scheme, which showed how to falsify documents. Smith Advertising was sued by Sarasota's Receivable Management Funding LLC, or RMF, who alleged that the father and son convinced RMF, an investment group, to provide more than $17 million to the company. RMF accused them of fraud and misrepresentation. The suit claimed that Todd Smith faked invoices from clients claiming to owe the firm money. RMF was supposed to collect that money to repay revolving credit loans and give investors 20% or more. Smith Advertising told RMF that one of their clients, Charlotte County Visitors Bureau, owed $900,000. RMF's administrative manager, Michael Schultz, reached out to the Bureau as a Smith-secured creditor. Laura Steiner, the Bureau's director, said their annual advertising budget was $255,000. Schultz told her that the Visitors Bureau had an outstanding balance of $900,000 and that he needed to collect it. Steiner wanted to know who did the due diligence on the supposed debt, to which Schultz sent her a stack of invoices. She maintained that someone forged her signature on at least one of the invoices. Smith Advertising collapsed in 2012 with a net worth of negative $169.8 million. The Smiths had 3 accomplices that worked for Smith Advertising and helped perpetrate the scheme. They pleaded guilty 2016 to conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud and agreed to help prosecutors. Gary Truman Smith pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud charges and received a 5-year sentence in January 2019. His son, Gary Todd Smith, pleaded guilty to wire fraud and mail fraud charges in 2017. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The judge ordered Todd Smith to pay his victims $63.5 million in restitution, but his bankruptcy makes it unlikely that he'll ever be able to pay them back. Their victims suffered financial devastation due to the Smiths' fraud scheme and dealt with bankruptcies and losing their homes, retirement funds, and children's education funds. Number 1. Like father, like daughter. Businessman Mac Hosendile Luckhope and his daughter Naledi were charged with fraud, forgery, and uttering under the company names Emabongwe Building, Civil Contractors CC, and Tsunami Civils. Together, they defrauded the Eastern Cape Education Department of 4 million South African rand, around $218,000. And yep, uttering is a real charge in South Africa. The charge of uttering is for a crime where someone intends to defraud knowingly by selling, publishing, or passing on a forged document. You know, basically scamming. They ran separate companies and submitted fraudulent lease agreements for their offices in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, leading to them being awarded funding meant for aspiring local entrepreneurs. Luckhope allegedly submitted an unlawful lease contract that misrepresented that Emabongwe Building was operational in the Eastern Cape and had a business in the province. The Provincial Education Department awarded 1.9 million South African rand, roughly $103,497. Naledi was the sole director of Tsunami Civils, and like her father, was awarded money from the Education Department in the Eastern Cape when she claimed her business there. She advertised herself on Instagram as an entrepreneur and sold clothes through social media. She caused a stir in South African tabloids when social media users thought she was used as a front by her dad being too young to pull off the scheme alone. It was a quiet night in January 2017 in Big Bend, Texas, when Walker Daugherty heard voices outside of his bedroom window. He sat up from bed, woke up his wife, and told her that he needed to check out the noise outside. According to Texas Monthly's investigative journalism, Walker grabbed the double-barrel shotgun from his nightstand and loaded it. He walked to the front of the ranch house and cracked the door open. He walked out onto his front porch and stood there for a few seconds in his pajamas. It was quiet until he heard screams coming from the woods. His fiancée, Ashley Boggs, got out of bed and yelled after him, telling Walker to wait before walking out there alone. But he was already on his way into the woods to find out what was happening. Ashley was frantically loading her pistol when she heard Walker yelling into the darkness, asking what people were doing on his property. She ran to wake Walker's sister, Morgan, and her husband, Michael. Ashley assumed Mexicans were outside who were trying to cross the border into the United States, and she feared for their safety. The night progressed to car crashes, violence, and injury. The story of this so-called border ambush rippled across Texas and fueled a political firestorm about illegal immigration. At the time, Walker was working as a guide for his family's hunting business, Big Rim Outfitters. He stayed at the family's Circle Dug Ranch, a 15,000-acre property in the Big Bend, about 200 miles from El Paso, Texas, and 5 miles east of the Rio Grande River. Morgan and Michael also lived at the family's ranch and slept in a separate bedroom. Walker, standing tall at 6'3", was a force to be reckoned with. He had years of hunting experience under his belt and guided clients every week through everything involved in hunting, from loading a gun to firing the perfect shot. That first week of January, when Walker was shot, 2 clients, Edwin and Carol Roberts, both in their 50s, were staying in an RV on the Circle Dug Ranch. Edwin was a former college football player and chiropractor, and Carol was a registered nurse from Pensacola, Florida. On the first day of their expedition at Circle Dug, Carol shot and outed a type of wild sheep with curved horns and a long beard that's now considered an invasive species in Big Bend. But the next day was uneventful. Edwin and Carol didn't get any hits. They went back to Walker's ranch at 4 p.m. where they had a big dinner of steak, shrimp, and potatoes. At the end of the night, the couple went to their RV, watched a movie, and went to bed. Less than 3 weeks before Walker was shot, people burglarized Circle Dug. Some strangers stole hunting knives, a flashlight, frozen pizzas, soft drinks, camouflage hunting jackets, and a $600 sleeping bag. The morning after the burglary, Morgan looked out into the distance and saw a group of people hiking up the Sierra Vieja and believed these people to be the culprits. Many border crossers from Mexico travel through Circle Dug on their way to safety. Hunters at the ranch often found empty water bottles and old sleeping bags left behind by the undocumented migrants before their hike. Several migrants came to the ranch in December 2016 asking for help. Morgan called Border Control to report the burglary. Agents found the migrants halfway up the Sierra Vieja and collected some of the stolen property. So, when Edwin and Carol arrived at Circle Dug for their week-long hunting excursion, Walker told them to be on guard and to arm themselves, especially at night. The night of the shot, Edwin and Carol were sleeping in the RV when they woke up to a rattling noise outside. Edwin yelled out that he had a gun. A man outside yelled back that he wanted the RV. He didn't have an accent. The man rattled the door again, and Edwin shot a single bullet through it. As this was happening, Ashley ran onto the front porch and down the stairs where she saw Walker hiding behind Edwin and Carol's RV, but he didn't see anyone else. Walker shouted at her to go back inside. He assumed that the trespassers, not Edwin, had shot. Inside the house, Morgan and Michael were readying themselves to go outside. Morgan grabbed her revolver. Michael grabbed his rifle, a Bushmaster AR-15. They ran to the front door and heard Edwin and Carol yelling. They saw Walker hiding behind the RV. Morgan stayed on the porch as Michael ran to join Walker. Michael didn't hear Edwin's shot, but he saw that Walker was very on edge. Walker said that someone tried to shoot him, and Edwin and Carol were being held hostage in the RV. The reverse lights switched on and the RV started reversing. Edwin was in the driver's seat, but Walker, from the back of the vehicle, assumed that the hijackers were trying to steal it. He shot the tires, and Michael followed, deflating the rear tire. Then he ran to the driver's side window and shot through it. Walker couldn't see that it was really Edwin in the front seat, since it was the middle of the night, and there were curtains in the RV windows. Michael fired another 2 shots. They took a step back and waited for someone to exit the vehicle. Just after Edwin shot through the RV door, Carol looked out the back window and saw the barrels of 2 guns, but didn't know that they belonged to Michael and Walker. Edwin told Carol to get down to the floor while he threw their RV in reverse, hoping to take out the trespassers lurking behind the vehicle. That's when Walker ran up to the side and shot Edwin. The bullet went through the driver's side and passenger's side windows and grazed Edwin's arm. The car spun out of control and veered into a cedar post that was holding up the roof of the hunting lodge. Walker's gun was empty, so he ran back to the house to reload it. Morgan was inside with her revolver, ready to fire at any moment. Then she heard another shot. A bullet hit Walker in the ribcage, went straight through his abdomen, destroyed a part of his liver, and lodged itself in the bottom of his left lung, dangerously close to his heart. He was hurt and could hardly stand. Morgan helped him into the house, where he collapsed in a chair. Morgan tried to put down her gun, but accidentally pulled the trigger and shot through her backpack and into the wall. She grabbed blankets and used them to put pressure on Walker's wound. Ashley was inside the house when Morgan and Walker came inside. Then she saw Edwin and Carol's RV try to zoom off, but accidentally ram into a boulder. Ashley found a phone and called 911. Michael was still outside looking for Walker and had no idea that he had been shot. Then Edwin appeared, yelling that he was shot, where they had a brief moment trying to figure out who each other was. Then Michael helped him inside. Then he went back out to find Carol, who was still lying on the floor of the RV. Carol and Edwin went into a separate room where she put years of intensive care nursing to use. She put pressure on his wounds and waited for the ambulance to arrive. As soon as the 911 call came in from Circle Dug, Chief Deputy of Presidio County Sheriff's Office, Joel Nunez, sped over to the ranch. He got out of the car and saw nothing out of the ordinary. He had his rifle drawn and walked up to the front porch and knocked. As soon as the door opened, he saw Walker on the floor. He asked the dispatcher to send backup. He stood near the front door, bracing himself for another attack. After 40 minutes, a medic finally arrived to help Walker. He was airlifted to the hospital and remained unconscious for several days. Border Patrol agents went out to look for the assailants, but Officer Nunez was convinced that Walker shot Edwin, but he wasn't sure who shot Walker. Edwin told reporters that the voice he heard from inside the RV did not have an accent. In Nunez's experience, all of the border crossers had accents. He also wondered why migrants would want to steal a huge RV that wasn't exactly the best thing to drive up the Sierra Vieja. He also doubted that it was drug smugglers who attacked because they usually tried to sneak by without drawing attention to themselves. The Presidio County Sheriff's Office received multiple phone calls from the people ready to start shooting any border crossers on the property. Nunez insisted that there was no evidence of an attack. Less than 2 weeks after the incident, the Sheriff's Office concluded their investigation and recommended that both Michael and Walker both be charged with deadly conduct, a third-degree felony. When they were indicted, District Attorney Sandy Wilson added another charge, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, a second-degree felony. Wilson and Nunez believed that the voice Edwin heard outside the RV was actually just Walker trying to play a prank. The story immediately spread that the ranch was attacked by undocumented migrants. Ashley even set up a GoFundMe for Walker since he didn't have medical insurance. They raised more than $18,000 in 2 days. A few days after the shootout, the Gila Growers Association in New Mexico released a statement saying that what happened at Circle Dug was an organized attempt to ambush and kill the family. With Donald Trump's inauguration less than 2 weeks away, the events at Circle Dug polarized the country even more. Agriculture Commissioner took to Facebook to declare his support for Walker, declaring him a hero and a man of God, furthering Trump's argument to create a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border. Across party lines, many Democrats claimed that Walker and Edwin blamed Mexican migrants for a prank gone wrong. Even Stephen Colbert made a jab at Walker on CBS's Late Show. For the most part, Walker was oblivious to the media attention he was getting. His family didn't even tell him about the criminal charges for fear of harming his recovery. When he was finally healthy enough to take the news, Walker was shocked, wondering why the police thought he did anything wrong. On April 11, 2017, he turned himself into police and was released on $10,000 bond. After being charged with deadly conduct and aggravated assault, Wilson offered them a deal of 10 years probation in exchange for a guilty plea. Walker accepted that he shot Edwin by accident, but the brother-in-laws remained unconvinced that Michael shot Walker, so they decided to fight the charges. After all, if they were convicted, they would lose their ability to carry a firearm and therefore end their careers as hunting guides. In March 2018, Wilson withdrew her offer of probation and sentenced both Walker and Michael to 10 years behind bars. The same month, Edwin and Carol filed a $1 million lawsuit against Walker and his entire family, including his parents, who weren't even there that night. The family was shocked. Edwin was a close friend and a client of the Dahlherdys for over 20 years. Just a few weeks after they filed their lawsuit, Michael and Walker's attorneys hired a ballistics expert, Richard Ernest, to study the x-ray of the bullet in Walker's lung. Ernest discovered that the bullet in Walker's lung was twice the size of the bullets in Michael's gun. But Wilson doubted Ernest's assessment. But other ballistic experts backed up Ernest's claims that the bullet lodged in Walker's lung was way too large to come from Michael's gun. And it didn't come from Edwin's either. So while the ballistics report exonerated Michael, it also opened up the question of who really shot Walker. Morgan and Ashley's witness statements didn't line up. Border Patrol didn't find any footsteps where Walker claimed the trespassers were standing when he was shot. There was a lot of inconsistencies in the case. Edwin claimed he only shot his gun once, but officers found 2 empty cartridges. Walker knew that there was no chance Edwin was the one who shot him. That would mean that he was driving the RV with his injured arm and aiming his gun perfectly out the window with the other. Walker says that most of the time, he forgets about the incident and the bullet is still lodged in his chest. But he has become suspicious of the media for taking his story and turning it into a political statement. He says that if the incident hadn't occurred on the US-Mexico border, the news might not have even picked up the story. That October, the district attorney dropped all of the charges against Walker and Michael. The next spring, Edwin and Carol settled their civil suit against the family. It was finally over, but Nunez wasn't satisfied. He believed he built a strong case against Michael and Walker and didn't forgive them for immediately blaming Mexican migrants. And still, the question of who shot Walker remains unsolved. The only evidence of possible intruders is the bullet lodged in his chest that doesn't match the bullets in Edwin or Michael's guns. Here are a few of the dumbest way to bribe people. Number 10. The Rapper. Krayshawn Bates, known as hip-hop artist Lil Cray, tried to bribe two police deputies with $35,000 cash for them not to arrest him. In January 2017, Lil Cray called the police saying that he had a flat tire and was going to miss his court-ordered curfew. He was slurring his speech, so police went to his home, where they found Lil Cray drunk and gambling with 8 others while free on bond. He challenged the police officer's ability to give him a breathalyzer test, but when he finally agreed, they discovered a blood alcohol content of 0.119. Lil Cray was brought back to jail on a $10,000 bond. He was so drunk that they had to take his mugshot while he slept on a bench. Lil Cray's rap sheet was already long. He was out on bond for trying to take some out in Cleveland, and this was his third arrest while out on bail. Prosecutors claim he was gang affiliated, making them extra diligent when handling his case. Some of the irony in this is that the judge allowed Lil Cray to shoot a music video in his courtroom, even though the judge was aware of the rapper's pending charges and criminal record. Judge Ryan stood by his decision, saying everyone is innocent until proven guilty, but admitted that allowing Lil Cray to film in a courtroom wasn't one of his wisest decisions. Lil Cray is open for T.I. and was asked to perform at SXSW. He's quickly making a name for himself in hip-hop, but not making the best impression on law enforcement. Number 9. La Mexicana. Loriana Aguirre proved there are many ways to become internet famous after crashing into several parked cars in Guanajuato, Mexico. Still tipsy from her drunk driving spree, officers had to hold her up while walking her away from the scene of the accident. Her arrest, however, gave her 200,000 followers on social media, a new internet identity, and even a mobile game, and it cost her about $5. Lorena collided with a series of parked cars while driving heavily intoxicated. Luckily, no one was injured by her actions. When the police arrived, Lorena was still sitting in her car, dazed and confused by what was happening around her. As the police began questioning Lorena after her initial crash, Lorena tried bribing her way out of trouble. She flashed a 100 peso note to the cops. Even though 100 pesos sounds like a lot, it's only worth a little over $5. Apparently, the cops were not enticed by this hefty sum. She then tried flirting a bit with the arresting officers, but the cops still forced her to exit her vehicle. The strangeness of her arrest led to Lorena becoming an internet star, getting 200,000 followers and trending on Twitter with the hashtag Lady100Pesos. Someone even made a mobile app where the objective was to avoid being arrested by throwing peso notes at oncoming cops. Maybe Lorena should try more than the cost of a deli sandwich the next time she wants to bribe some officers. Number 8. The Health Inspector. Brothers John and Jack DeSanto, alongside their cousin Robert Cuba, own 3 restaurants on the same city street in Brooklyn, New York. These 3 men thought they could try to get a tip-off when their next surprise inspections would be, and hatched a scheme that required a Department of Health employee to play along. The plan was to bribe the DOH employee with $1,000 worth of entries into their Super Bowl betting pool, which could pay up to $50,000 to the winner. All the employee had to do was to give the trio a week's notice before any surprise inspection. However, the flaw in their plan was the integrity of the employee they got in contact with. He immediately reported the bribe to his superiors, and an investigation began on the trio. One of the owners kept a text conversation going with an undercover investigator, even meeting them in person twice. Between the 2 meetings, the investigator collected $16,000 in bribe money. According to Brooklyn police, surprise inspections can be grueling for restaurant owners. Failing health inspections can lead to hefty fines or even restaurant closures, but they ultimately help keep restaurants clean and safe for families to dine. All 3 restaurants owned by the DeSantos brothers and Robert had A health ratings with minimal violations. With the evidence collected and the investigation complete, Brooklyn police arrested the 3 owners and took them to court. They were released without bail and were due back in court in January 2022. The story fizzled out after they were caught. Perhaps they bribed the papers not to cover their court case. Number 7. The Maitre d'. Restaurant owners and staff members discovered last summer that bribes can come in many different shapes and sizes, especially in Southampton, New York. As COVID restrictions began to lift, there was a surge in restaurant attendance and reservation lists were flooded. Mitch Modell, former CEO of Modell's Sporting Goods, tried to get a table at 75 Main, a high-end restaurant in Southampton. The bar was full to the brim, and wait times for a table stood at 2 hours. Mitch began to hand out tips to the hosts and servers, hoping to boost his spot on the wait list. He ended up handing out hundreds of dollars to no avail until offering to cover the bill of 2 women, landing him a spot at their table. He joined their party along with 5 of his friends, leaving a sea of angry diners in the line behind them. Reservation lists have become a battlefield as guests are giving high-end bribes to staff members to guarantee their spots or move up their reservation dates. These bribes include NASCAR tickets, helicopter rides, flights in private planes, boat trips, and concert tickets. Some guests even bring envelopes full of cash to bribe the staff. According to a regular at Le Bilbo Quay in Sag Harbor, a manager for the restaurant took a small voyage on a guest's yacht and spent the afternoon in the golf clubhouse the guests attended. Ian Duke, the owner of Southampton Social Club, was offered $3,000 from a guest who only wanted a table for the after-dinner drink service. So, if you're trying to get a reservation at any high-end New York restaurants anytime soon, be prepared to shell out your life savings worth in tips. Number 6. The Landlord. In December 2015, tenants of an apartment building in Bushwick, New York, awoke to an aggressive banging on their doors. A man was marching up and down the 4-story building, screaming that everyone had 72 hours to evacuate. If they didn't comply, the man threatened the tenants would be taken away in handcuffs. Many of the elderly residents were scared for their lives. But it turned out to be a ruse devised by the landlord and 2 inspectors from New York City's Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was all part of a bribery scandal involving dozens of city employees. Court documents revealed that landlords paid inspectors to fabricate building code violations and other complaints. Some of the payoffs were only for a few $100, which doesn't seem worth it. The city website showed more than 50 unsolved violations for the building, including leaks, lead paint hazards, cold water, bed bugs, and much more. With enough violations, the tenants could be served with an order to vacate, thus freeing up the space for new tenants. The landlord of the Bushwick building wanted his tenants out. It's unclear why, but perhaps because Bushwick is becoming a gentrified, valuable neighborhood whose buildings can be revamped and rented or sold at much higher prices. When tenants didn't pay their rent on time, he was eager to kick them out. Investigators conducted a wiretap into the landlord's phone and discovered that he paid inspectors $700 to pretend there was a vacate order. The landlord and both inspectors pleaded not guilty. Number 5. The Fan. When police in New Mexico spotted a Texas truck swerving in and out of lanes, they pulled the driver over and discovered he had been drinking and driving. The driver, Tyler Handley, openly admitted to driving drunk after coming from a sports bar where he was watching the Dallas Cowboys game. Handley was decked out in Cowboys gear and refused to take a sobriety test. While the officer checked Handley's belongings, Handley made him an offer. He asked if the officer's body camera was on and then offered him $10,000 cash if he let him go. What would have been a misdemeanor WDI then turned into a felony bribery charge. Handley was taken to the police station where his behavior shocked police. He tried to pee on the floor, break the handcuffs, and insulted officers. This was Handley's 3rd DWI charge. We bet it coincides with how the Cowboys play on any given Sunday. Number 4. The Sharer. In another shocking police bribery case, one man tried to get out of a DUI by offering the police officer a beer. Lazaro Hernandez was pulled over at around 3 a.m. for trying to pass an officer who was directing traffic near an accident. Hernandez said he thought the traffic officer was waving him through when he passed. When he was pulled over at a traffic stop, police officers smelled alcohol on his breath and administered a field sobriety test. Hernandez defended himself, saying that he had a drink 13 hours before. He got increasingly more upset as he performed poorly in the sobriety test and eventually refused to do the walking portion. The officer placed him under arrest for a DUI. While sitting in the back of the patrol car, he tried to hand the officer a beer, and when that didn't work, $400 cash. He was trying to negotiate the impending DUI charge to super speeding. The officer refused the bribe and took Hernandez to the county jail, where he was charged with driving under the influence, bribery, open container, reckless driving, and failure to obey authorized persons directing traffic. Number 3. The Vaccine Lovers. Sometimes bribery and public health lines get blurry, especially during COVID-19. In January 2022, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot tweeted a picture of stacks of cash spelling out the words, "Get Vaxxed," to encourage citizens to get vaccinated. Lightfoot has been serious about the COVID-19 public health crisis, but this was seen as a pathetic attempt to convince people to do something in exchange for precisely $826. She previously mandated vaccines for all Chicago city workers unless they are willing to get tested twice per week. She also issued a vaccine mandate for numerous business patrons, especially for gyms, restaurants, and entertainment venues. She threatened to shut down businesses that did not enforce the vaccine mandate for their customers. But this recent tweet was met with laughter rather than respect. But Lightfoot isn't the only one to incentivize people to get vaccinated. Many states offered jackpots and grand prizes in the millions of dollars for people who got the COVID vaccine. Private companies got on the bandwagon as well, with Krispy Kreme offering free donuts to vaccinated patrons and Uber and Lyft offering free rides to people on their way to get the shot. But for some people, it'll take a lot more than $826 to get the jab. Number 2. The Philosopher. Florida police charged Ariel Engert, a philosophy student at the University of Florida, with driving under the influence of drug charges after she was pulled over for weaving her car around Clearwater, Florida, early in the morning. Ariel failed several field sobriety tests, and the police found that her blood alcohol content was over double the legal limit for being behind the wheel. The police arrested her when they discovered a small amount of drugs in her purse, adding possession to the charge. Once at the county jail, Ariel was determined to bribe her way out of the misdemeanors. She offered Deputy Brian Sudbrink certain adult favors if he'd dismiss the charges and let her go. The offer gave Ariel her first bribery charge. While in county jail, the police discovered another small bag of narcotics tucked into Ariel's bra, giving her 2 more felony charges for possession and bringing illegal substances into a detention facility. She then made 2 more attempts to bribe the police to let her go, making the same offer to Munoz and Biddle's deputies. 2 bribery charges later, Ariel was freed from custody after posting a $5,000 bond. In the end, Ariel racked up a DUI charge, marijuana possession, narcotics transport into the county jail, and 3 different bribery charges to add to her criminal record. This wasn't her first charge for drunk driving and possession, according to police records, so it's probably safe to say it won't be her last time being charged either. Number 1. The Restaurateur. Apparently, Ann Pizitz missed all those roadside billboards warning about the dangers of drinking and driving. Police caught up with Ann on August 3, 2019, but what should have been a misdemeanor turned into a felony and a much higher penalty to pay. Starting as a food truck and growing to a franchise, Ann co-founded Melt, a grilled cheese restaurant with several locations in Alabama. A concerned citizen called the police complaining about a reckless driver. When the police arrived to investigate, they found Ann in her black Mercedes driving rather erratically. They pulled her over to find her texting and reeking of alcohol. She failed several field sobriety tests and refused to take a breathalyzer. Now, this would be a pretty run-of-the-mill DUI charge. However, once Ann arrived at the Madison County Jail, she made one last attempt to get out of trouble. She offered one of the officers $1,000 to forget this happened and let her walk, even threatening the stability of the officer's position as a public servant. The grilled cheese queen of Alabama thought she had some pull in local government. The bribe upped the ante, although she was heavily intoxicated when she made the offer. Unfortunately for Ann, the officer she bribed had his body cam rolling, capturing the whole thing on camera. According to jail records, the attempted bribe raised her bail to $6,000. Unable to pay up, she spent the night in jail. Moral of the story? When billboards tell you not to drink and drive, listen. Click here to watch one of these next videos. And let us know in the comment section how much you think is appropriate to tip when it comes to getting in clubs and restaurants.